Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I am Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, authors, successful entrepreneurs, spiritual teachers, exceptional people who will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to get them as soon as they are released. Welcome to Personal Development Mastery Podcast. For this episode and the next 2 ones, I'm going to revisit 3 interviews that I did in the early days of the podcast. These 3 interviews were quite long, and at that time I had split them into 2 parts each. I decided to revisit them and repost them again because I believe they were conversations with very deep and useful messages inside, and I realized that especially if you have discovered the podcast recently, it's not easy to go back and check over 150 episodes. So I picked these 3 specific interviews that I think and I hope that you will benefit from, especially if the topic interests you. So I have abridged or condensed these 3 conversations and I'm presenting them in a more concise format over this and the following 2 episodes of the podcast, and I really hope that you enjoy them and get value out of them. The first conversation is with Rob Scott. It happened in June 2020 and was originally featured on episodes 37 and 38. Rob Scott is a master-level mindset coach who has been running his personal development business for over a decade now and has helped thousands of people shift their identity and dramatically break through their limitations. Having taught for companies like MindValley, his mission is to end suffering on planet Earth, and he teaches the powerful and profound mindsets that people need to achieve success, happiness, and fulfillment. I hope you enjoy the conversation and Rob's profound message. I wanted to start with some elements of your story, which obviously is definitely sparks conversation, interest. It's a truly fascinating story. So I want to start by asking you to take us back and paint the picture of some of the background that actually led you to where you are today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, let's assume for a second that I'm actually okay at what I do, right? Like if I have any level of really being able to help people today, some people make an assumption about that maybe I always had it together, or I always, came from some life that was, really together. And it's actually very much the opposite. I came from maybe as close to the maximum of dysfunction that you can have without dying, maybe. I had a lot of people around me that actually died. And where that sort of began for me was at a very young age. I went through a lot of really deep and very ugly abuse and dysfunction. Not to overshare, but I was sexually abused. I was actually raped for years by someone that was a babysitter that my parents would leave me with for periods of time. And that went on from maybe the age of around 3 to around 8 or 9. And I ended up getting, I never felt safe. I never felt, loved. I didn't get the normal emotional development that a child you would hope would get, right? And so through that, I started to use drugs and alcohol at an obscenely early age. So think about a 7-year-old starting to play with pretty heavy drugs. I started to use alcohol consistently. By the time I was into my teens and my early 20s, I was deeply addicted to very heavy drugs. And partying is not really the word, but just, really was a drug addict and an alcoholic very, very early. And so I ended up having that be, into jails and institutions and rehabs and halfway houses and, all the institutions that you can end up in. I had the fun experience of going in and out of and all the different ways. And then, I ended up homeless. I was just living in my car and then living without a car for a long time. And so along the way, my business is now called Fundamental Shift. I had this really, honestly, it was a self-transcendent experience of really deep transformation. And I was actually working on that. I mean, I was in a deep self-inquiry of, what are we doing here? What's the point of this? I had really bad personal lenses and ideas about the world that were, really holding me back in profound ways. And in some ways, those became obvious to me in a moment, in sort of a breakthrough. And so what I discovered way back when was, if I were to put even some of those down, I started to have much higher function in the world, right? If I could put down this lens of I'm a victim and actually just come at the world with a blank slate, I was able to really perform differently. And so I actually went from homeless to vice president of technology without any career degrees or any certifications of any kind, but just by performing well in just a handful of years. To go further in the story, though, even during that, ascent of success, whatever that might be, I got really sick with cancer as well. So by the end of this, I'm through cancer. Luckily, I survived that. But I end up at the end of that, and I know what it is to be deeply dysfunctional emotionally. I know what it is to be deeply dysfunctional physically. I know what it is to be deeply dysfunctional mentally. And I've made some significant changes in that. And so in around 2005, right when podcasts started to come out, I started to share some of these ideas, like how do we consciously evolve? How do we change ourselves? What is hypnosis? What is meditation? What are these tools to gain some self-mastery? And what is it to do personal development, literally on yourself? And I was shocked, but there weren't too many people listening to podcasts back then, but the people that were, many of them were listening to me. And a lot of them, literally all over the world, started asking me for coaching. It was, what's it cost to work with you? I'd love to talk to you. How do we, do this? And so through that, I started to test out doing some coaching. And what I realized was that was almost the thing that I had always been good at, that even in the deep dysfunction of being a child, I was always trying to help people see things differently. And, there was some innate skill or ability or strategy, maybe a survival strategy that I developed that was really helpful in helping people not only shift mindset, but shift behavior, shift habits, do different things like that. And it was probably the secret of the corporate success that I'd had, because I was able to manage people well and, get through conflicts and do all these different things. And so as soon as I saw how special that was and how meaningful that was, I was really calling to help other people in a big way. And so I never looked back. I think it was probably 2006 that I started my business. So it's been, 14 plus years now that I've been solely working on helping people evolve. And I've developed this thing called identity shifting, which is, really what I think is the most meaningful way to go in and take somebody through the transformation that's required to really personally evolve into a profoundly different version of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Apart from that fundamental shift, was there any other key defining moment or turning point in your journey?
There were probably many of them. Mm-hmm. That is without a doubt the most profound. After that, there were levels of I'm now sober about 16 years, right? Just, I'm not, although I really love and appreciate the path of 12-step programs and all the areas that those exist. I'm not personally somebody who follows that. I don't go to meetings. I sort of did this in another way. I actually used a coach and a mentor and a counselor who's deeply steeped in the steps that was really helpful to me. So it's not that there's no influence of that, but I don't really do meetings myself and that. But that was another big choice of mine, because I was actually very successful in the corporate world. I'd put down very heavy drugs and things. I had my own limits about what I would and wouldn't do. But there was a time when I actually decided, I'm actually going to not do anything. I want to deal with consciousness directly. And that was, another profound shift in my own commitment to what it is to be alive, what it is to make meaning, what it is to relate to, the universe, right? And I didn't want to alter myself anymore. And I didn't want to use substances to escape painful things. I wanted to go through painful things and evolve from them and use the learnings and all that. And that's a pretty big change as well.
I think what you said about escape, the word escape, is something that some people do not realize. So
Mm.
many people that drink socially or drink, they're not a heavy drinkers,
Yeah.
but they drink frequently. It's only if they stop for a period of time. I can speak by my own personal experience when I did a challenge, a 6-month alcohol-free challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized very quickly after a month or two that easy way out of a negative emotional situation
Yeah.
was not there anymore. So I had to face it, and that gave me some big realizations.
Totally. I'm not sitting here telling anybody to be sober, right? It's if you I think people can use alcohol and different things very
Mm-hmm.
successfully, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a great place for that for some people. I think that addiction in general can be expanded out into when our mind gets captured by some hyper stimulus that puts us not only chemically but emotionally and otherwise out of balance. And so I think we're seeing that to some degree with our digital experience these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get this addiction to sort of scrolling on Instagram or to feeling differently by the next, little hit that we get from
Yeah.
the next picture, the next picture, the next picture. And we're noticing that our time where if we really were in our highest version of self, we might be creating or doing something that was, good for us. We end up just escaping and trying to feel differently, whether we're even fully conscious of it or not. But you sort of wake up and go, wow, it's 3 hours later and I've just been rolling through TikTok or whatever, right? It becomes a thing where we're getting captured by something. And I think that concept of hyperstimulus is really important. I heard it from a guy named Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is a phenomenal thinker. He points out that all addiction is really around where we pull out what in its natural state might be really sustaining and good, but we pull it out into its most potent form and it becomes a hyperstimulus. So if you think about natural fruits and things that have sugars that are very good in their balance in nature, we pull out the sugar and we put it into a pile and we just eat the sugar and it overstimulates the body, right? We do that with fats as well. We do that with cocaine. If you were to just chew on a cocaine leaf, it may not be the worst thing in the world for you. It might give you focus and whatever, but if you pull it out and you do lines of cocaine, it's a hyperstimulus and it oversaturates dopamine and it gets the brain into a really hypercritical state. And again, to whatever degree, this can begin to happen with the technology that we're doing and all the other things. So I think we're watching a culture and a world that's becoming more addicted without noticing it in a lot of directions where it's not okay to just actually be, right? It's actually, and so we need these stimuluses, like you were saying, alcohol, to feel quote unquote normal or to feel okay with what is. And that is where it's beginning to get out of balance. And so back to my choice with it, it was obvious to me that I was using it to feel differently and to manage certain things that were uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be okay without anything. I wanted to see if I could, do that. And it's been a deeply meaningful, very rewarding choice in my life.
Let's go back to that fundamental shift. You described it as a self-transcending experience that changed everything in your life, a turning point. Was that instant, or did it take a period of time?
I think change, I don't want to say always, but I think change actually happens instantaneously, but the work up to it takes time, right? The shift is a real switch very often. But mastery is often not like that. Mastery is getting better at something over time. But I often say that if you bring somebody to me who's depressed, I can actually change their state and make them happy in an instant. Mm-hmm. But I can't make them concert pianist. I can't make them billionaire, right? Those things take mastery and development over time, right? So I call it wake up and there's grow up, right? Mm-hmm. So you can wake up in this moment, but then to apply that over time, you really need to grow up and you need to apply it in all its ways. And, that's a game of time. But the wake up is and can be instant. As far as that self-transcendence, can I give that a model? I want to actually talk about that. So the name of your podcast is Personal Development Mastery, right? If we talk about what it is to personally develop, I think that the most profound version of that, what I've chosen to call that, is identity shifting, right? It's literally becoming a profoundly different version of yourself in some way. And I think that there are levels of doing that. And the first one is a sense of self-mastery, right? And the next level would be some sense of self-actualization. And then the next level of that, maybe the highest level of that, would be some sense of a self-transcendence. And so rather than defining each of those with like exact terms, because they're big terms and all that, it's maybe more useful to sort of figure out what each of those means and like what we're pointing to so that we can just at least understand them. So if we talk about self-mastery, I would say that that's some degree of self-control and some degree of being able to overcome your unconscious habits, maybe some of your unconscious biases, maybe some of your impulses that are more instant gratification based instead of delayed gratification based, right? I think that distinction is really important because there's a version of you that you want to be that's going to require that you delay gratification and don't always do the immediate interesting thing, right? The immediate interesting thing is that sugar or is that drink of alcohol or that I'm going to watch TV right now or I'm just going to eat food on the couch and be comfortable right now. I love comfort right now. Like, let's not, that's a great thing. But when it's at the cost of who you could become and what you're really trying to move toward, self-mastery is some version of having more control over yourself so that you can start to apply yourself in the areas that matter. If we get into self-actualization, what I mean by that, or what I'm trying to point that toward, is that then you're using some form of that self-mastery to actualize some potential in the things that matter most to you, right? So let's say you want to be a business owner. Well, self-actualizing in that is actually becoming a business owner that's talented at that, right? So that even if your business was taken away, you didn't just get lucky, you could go build another business. Like you actually have the skills and the ability and the self-mastery to actualize in that potential. If you're trying to be an athlete, it's not just the desire of being an athlete, but you've actualized in something. You've actually become something in that. And then I think the thing that is even beyond a lot of that is a quality of self-transcendence. And so if what I mean by self-transcendence and what that might be pointing toward is that you're not only you're not only a sense of self, right? If the only focus that we have is always about me, that's actually a little narcissistic, right? That's spiritually, there's an idea of like putting down the self and actually just being in consciousness without maybe even an ego in that moment, right? And so there are parts of self that if we can't objectify them and get away from them, they're actually really hard to change if we're in them, right? So getting some sense of self-transcendence. And to make that even clearer, some of the parts that matter the most is the we space, right? So like you and I being here, if I'm really going to listen to you, I have to put down myself to some degree to try to model what you mean, right? So if I'm doing that, literally just in that moment of if I'm genuinely trying to listen to you, I've put down myself, I've transcended myself in some sense. And so I'm actually trying to model what you are. So as we grow the we space, how we govern, how we build companies, how we run families, how we parent, there's this idea of the capability of being able to transcend self or get beyond egoic me, right? In some meaningful way. So if we go back to what happened to me, I actually almost did it in the wrong direction. I had this big transcendent experience, but I didn't really have a great sense of self-mastery yet. And I certainly hadn't actualized in any directions yet, right? So as I had this transcendent kind of thing, it was like I had this almost big spiritual awakening or some real seeing that was deeply meaningful to me. But if I go back to it, it was messy for me. Like it was hard work to then figure it out from there. So as I coach on this, the first steps of this are dealing in the space of self-mastery on some level. Like, do you have the capability from where you are to overcome your own limits in some significant way? Can you begin to make the moves that are the better choices and manage your state of self really towards some meaningful self-actualization for yourself while building the capability to put down yourself when that's appropriate and actually begin those tools of self-transcendence as well? And when you put those three things together, you really can become this profoundly different version of yourself that's optimized in a lot of ways that are deeply meaningful.
Awesome. And let me ask you, since you mentioned the term of spiritual, what does that term mean to you, spirituality?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that I want to make tangible for people, because I think there's a lot of woo around this. Beliefs might be a really interesting place to get into, because there's a tangible way to talk about beliefs. I'm not talking about believing in something. I'm not talking about anything like that. To me, the spiritual is almost the ground level of just being, right? It's if you can actually take on a position that just being alive is pretty darn amazing, right? You've actually accomplished quite a bit, right? That this is the difference between a self that is captured in time, in I'm not there yet, I'm not enough, this isn't enough, I have to get to somewhere else, right? A quality of bringing spirituality into the moment is a deep appreciation, which may look in tangible terms more like being grateful or being present or being able to put down thought. Like there's a deep difference between thinking and experiencing. Actually, different parts of the brain light up. And so many of us are just caught in thought all the time. We actually don't know how to turn off thought. We don't know what is thought, what isn't thought. We think a lot of our thoughts are real things. So when we worry about something, it feels very real and we get very activated by it, but it's only a thought. And so things like meditation and things like that can give you a sense of what the difference is between what a thought is, what that impulse is, which is very instant gratification, right? If a thought wants to be chased and followed, it's like, this is important, pay attention. But a spiritual move there is noticing, oh, that's a thought, having the ground of knowing, I'm something that's thinking right now. And there's also experience of my breath, of the ground. And so to make that a little bit more tangible, two people are walking down a hall. One is deeply lost in thought and worried about their taxes or what somebody thinks of them or what's going on and all that. That is not very spiritual. That is much more human, right? Somebody else is very present and every step on the ground is beautiful. Every breath is just embodied and really pleasant and amazing. That is an expression of being spiritual. You're connected to isness and being much more profoundly.
I like very much the way you described it. It's very...
And by the way, those are skills, right? Those are not things to believe in or hope for or wish about. Because if you're doing that, that's just more thinking. That's just more modeling of maybe one day I'll get there, right? Maybe one of the biggest problems with Buddhism is if somebody studies something like that, whether it's Taoism or Buddhism or whatever, that there's some enlightened place to get to that's away from here. That's exactly the opposite expression of actually being enlightened, which is just being here, right? Being right where you are. And by the way, that's not always pleasant, right? If you're anxious, the spiritual move is literally just to be anxious, right? There's truly an energy in your chest. Your breathing is heavy, right? But not changing it and being with it, being conscious of what is the spiritual move in that moment, right? If we can just use the term spiritual to try to describe that. I think that's what a deep sense of spirituality can look like.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Something you say about identities, and you say that there is a core problem that humanity has, which is the limit of our current identity, the identities that we hold. Can you expand on this?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you pull that from, and oftentimes, if you pull a certain tidbit, it's maybe not always appropriate, right? Yeah. So let's say that if your sense of self is not sound, it's going to be a deep limiter. It is the thing that needs to shift before other things are going to shift for you. Okay, so if you are, let's say you have a lot of limiting beliefs that you can't see about yourself, but they're in your sense of self. So things like, I'm not enough, I'll never succeed, I'm actually not a beautiful person, I'm not popular, I'm not good with people, right? These are what I would call limiting beliefs that we take on, and they feel true to us. So I would say that they make up a sense of self that is now going in the world. And so if you're trying to become good at sales, but you think that, I'm not deserving of money, right? You're going to limit yourself without even knowing it, right? So you end up with these invisible to you limits in your sense of self that is the core limiting factor. So I would say that much coaching out there, maybe most coaching, is incomplete in the fact that it's often very skills-based right? So you might go to a nutrition coach to learn a diet technique and a plan, which is great. And maybe it's exactly right. But if you put that on top of a self that is not capable of change or growth, is maybe set to, I'm not good at this, or I'm never going to be healthy, or I'm not athletic, or whatever those sense of self is. Mm-hmm. If you're just putting that skill on top of something that's going to self-sabotage its way out, you're going to need other coaching, or you're going to need to follow up, or you're going to need to do whatever.
Yeah.
In the world, even of therapy is often very emotionally based, which is deeply important, but it's not very skills based, right? It doesn't give you the skills out here. So what's at the center of all of your desires and also all of your limits and problems is you, right? The common denominator underneath is you. So if you're not shifting yourself to get over your own biases and limits and things like that, any skills that you add on top are on this sort of weak foundation of you to begin with. So that's, I guess, what I mean by core problem in a sense of identity that's not doesn't have mastery or actualization, or doesn't have a quality of being able to transcend the ego and self in any way.
Would you say that apart from a collection of beliefs or a bunch of beliefs, is there anything else to identity apart from the beliefs we hold?
Yeah, identity, again, is something that we could maybe say is very vast in all the ways that we could talk about what it is. I think that if I were to simplify it down for this conversation, mm-hmm. You have, in the realm of thinking, let's think about it this way. If you're going to change who you are in a profound way, you're going to need to think different thoughts. For sure, right? If you just keep thinking your same pattern of thinking and you don't gain any mastery in being able to change your attention and how you think, that's going to be a problem. You need to deeply change how you feel about things. You're going to need to grow in some emotional mastery sense, because honestly, if let's say you're depressed, even if I were to add millions of dollars to your bank account and make you really successful, if you still feel depressed, what's it really worth? It's not the point. The reason we want the money is we want to feel differently. We want to feel secure and proud and happy and all those things. Yeah. And then we also want some mastery over doing, right? We want to do meaningful things. We want to be able to apply ourselves to the tasks at hand that matter to us and succeed through them. So thinking, feeling, and doing, if all of those can change, right, then we're really a different person, right? Then we've really grown and changed. And we do this all the time. You don't think the same things that you thought when you were 5, right? Some people do get stuck, and maybe they think very much similarly to how they thought when they were 20. But if you're growing and changing, you'll notice that you're probably changing how you think. You're learning, you're seeing different things, you're taking on new stuff. But in the realm of thinking, there's not only these conscious tools that we've talked about, tools of being able to focus your attention and all that stuff, maybe changing the meaning of something, right? If I see somebody who looks at me funny and I notice that I think it means that they don't like me, consciously, maybe I can change the meaning of that, right? I can change what that means. And that's very meaningful. And that's a conscious tool, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a set of conscious tools, how we can change our conscious thinking, that are profoundly helpful. But we've also talked about these unconscious patterns, right? This is changing thought, but doing it in a way that's addressing the parts of ourself that we can't see. And if we talk about the unconscious, right, you're making your heartbeat right now, but you're not consciously aware of how. Like if I said, hey, stop your heartbeat right now, you couldn't if you wanted to, right? So there are processes that are going on outside of our conscious awareness. And many of these are things that we take on about ourselves, these limits that when we take them on, they're usually protective and really helpful when we take them on, but they end up limiting us later, right? We end up overcorrecting because somebody embarrassed us, or we had an abusive parent, or, a friend was mean to us in middle school, or whatever happened along the way. We take on things again, like I'm not enough, or I don't deserve money, or even things like rich people are jerks, right? A lot of people think rich people are jerks, but they really want money. How are they going to resolve that, right? Your subconscious mind isn't going to let you become something that you detest. So you have to change your unconscious patterns about money and about, I've worked with very overweight people. And if you try to add willpower to a diet and exercise, that's going to be very difficult. And almost everybody fails at that. But if you go in and change them at an identity level into I am an athlete, right? Well, if they really take that on sincerely in their unconscious, an athlete works out, an athlete feeds themselves well, an athlete does things. And even if they're horribly overweight presently, them taking on I am an athlete doesn't require willpower. The right behaviors and the right things start to happen because they've shifted that unconscious mind. So in the thinking realm, you have this unconscious world that needs to be addressed. You've got conscious tools that need to be addressed. And then out in the emotional space, there's some meaningful shifts to gain emotional mastery. And then in the doing space, there's some things with purpose and focus and different things like that that help you in the doing space. So if I were to break down identity, it's got all those parts, right?
Hi, it's Agi here, interrupting you with something you may find useful. The most frustrating feeling is when you're trying to focus, but you can't get your brain to concentrate and zone in on the important work in front of you. This happens to me all the time, especially on the days I feel I have too many different things to do. And if it happens to you, you are not alone. 40% of people say they have to make a big effort to concentrate. This isn't some minor thing, but if you're having trouble getting focused, I have a solution for you. I'm so excited to be partnering with Brain FM. Brain FM is a great app, and I use it to block out my mental chatter and zone in on my number one priority of the day. Brain FM uses functional music, which is backed by science and research, and it is designed to give us that extra edge when we need our undivided attention. But they also have relaxation, meditation, and deep sleep modules that help you unwind and recharge. So if you want to be able to place your full attention exclusively in the activity you choose, whether that's meaningful work or relaxing or getting high quality sleep, right now, Personal Development Mastery Podcast listeners get 20% off Brain FM subscription at brain.fm/Agi. That's an amazing deal for such a great app. Thousands of people have given 5-star reviews to Brain FM. Find out why. brain.fm/Agi. I like very much the differentiation between the conscious tools we can use for a limiting belief or a behavior and the unconscious, dealing with the unconscious patterns, which is where they actually originate from.
Yeah. Can I say more about that real quick?
Please do.
Yeah. So a way to illustrate that is your conscious mind gaining mastery of your own attention. You really can get past suffering to a great degree with that. And so let me define suffering really quickly, and then I'll try and backtrack to this really fast.
Okay.
If I were to simplify suffering down to maybe the most elegant way to say it that I know of is suffering is resisting what is. Okay. So any kind of suffering, physical, emotional, mental suffering, is something is occurring and my sense of being doesn't like it. And so I deeply resist it. Right? So think of a child who doesn't get their way. I can't watch my show, right? The reality is they're not going to be able to watch their show, but they can't accept it. And so there's deep suffering, right? If I get punched in the arm, there's a sensation and what I might call pain. I'm not saying we need to get rid of pain. Pain's deeply important. But my suffering about the pain, I have options with that. I can go in and be curious about what the tingling in my arm feels like. If I were a trained Marine, it might be no big deal. But if I were a really afraid person, a punch might be devastating to me. Like it could traumatize me for my life, right? So there's a whole scale of suffering that can happen in there. So let's say we gain the conscious tools to manage suffering so that I'm truly at peace in a great way, right? Well, I'll switch gears and talk about a quality of humans that's maybe unique, right? We're the only people that you could literally sit in a white room with no stimulus at all. And through our own mind, through that imagination that I talked about before, we could literally put ourselves into a panic, right? With no stimulus at all, no real problems happening at all. I could just get depressed by my meaning making that I'm doing, right? I could make meaning that makes me anxious or makes me depressed or makes me happy, right? I have a lot of ability to affect what I'm doing just in my own meaning making, even if nothing is happening, okay? So let's say that I'm in that white room and I'm a master at this. It's fantastic. Thoughts are still going to pop up, even with no stimulus. Stimulus affects you. right? If you're in a bad situation and you've got an abusive person in your life, that will affect your thinking. That will affect your suffering to whatever degree. And so there are doing things in the world to get away from those. But let's say we've even mastered that. Now I'm in the white room. Nothing's happening to me. Thoughts are still popping up. Where are they coming from, right? They're coming from the unconscious mind. Okay. So even if I've got total mastery of my conscious mind, theoretically, if I have bad patterns that are popping up, I'm not enough, you're never going to be good, nobody likes you, whatever. If those are the thoughts that are coming up, I can maybe even deal with them once they're conscious and go, no, I can change the meaning of that. I can change the meaning of that. But how exhausting would that be if you have this horrible set of patterns, right? And so that's why both of these really matter, right? You've got to gain these conscious tools, but if you don't address those patterns that are coming up, it's very difficult. And so a lot of people talk about the subconscious and it's like, well, you can't see the unconscious. What could you possibly do about it? Well, you can't see the unconscious yourself because it's truly outside of consciousness to you, but you can see the effects of it. You can see that you continually procrastinate. You can see that, in a shadow work kind of way, you can see that, well, I keep seeing that everybody's angry at me, but people are telling me that they're not angry. Like that might be coming from me, right? There are hints of what's happening there that you can find to go back and actually repattern many of those things and ultimately give you an unconscious that's serving up wonderful, useful things, right? If the thoughts that are on autopilot are useful and helpful, that's amazing, right? Like how great would that be? And then you have the conscious tools to deal with all the challenges that come up out here or otherwise. Now you're optimized. Now you're truly a different version of yourself. Now you're, deeply realized and actualized, etc.
Talking about beliefs, I like very much the analogy that you mentioned at some point of the lens. And what, even though I had heard of the lenses, the minds as metaphors for our beliefs or our mindsets, there was something that really made an impression on me, that a lens by its own nature is not something that you pay attention to it. You look through it, but you don't look at it. So our beliefs, or this, as I'm holding my lenses now as an analogy, allow us to paint or tint our perception, but we don't really see the lens at all. We just see past the lens.
Yeah. So it's the way I usually share that is that there's two functions of a lens, and most of us are only aware of one of them, right? So, and I literally, just to start from the very beginning, I'm talking about lenses like your glasses, right? Like you were holding on to. Contact lenses. If people don't wear glasses, they've certainly looked through a microscope or a telescope, right? The function of a lens that we're all aware of is it alters what we see, right? It changes what we see. And the right lens can alter it in a way that's really helpful, right? My glasses are definitely a big help to me. But if I were to just put randomly any glasses on, or I were to put many glasses on, right? All of a sudden I can't see very well, right? Now, that's interesting, right? So lenses alter what we see. That's a really important concept to get. The second concept that most people don't think about is that lenses are built to be invisible, right? They're not built to be considered. They're actually built to be looked through and kind of forgotten, right? So while I'm wearing my glasses, I don't really consider my glasses ever. I just bebop through the world dealing with this altered thing. So much so that if I wore rose-colored glasses, quite literally, in the beginning, I might notice that it's different, but eventually that would become normalized to me. Like I wouldn't consider that the world was any other way. And in fact, if I really didn't know I was wearing rose-colored glasses, I wouldn't know any other colors other than, the rose tint that I'm looking through. Well, the analogy is that our beliefs and our thinking is very much like that, right? Our thoughts and our beliefs alter our perception in a deeply meaningful way, but they too are built to be invisible, right? We take them on to be the truth of the situation. So if I take on a belief about politics, right, and I don't know, I can't see that it's my belief, I'm actually looking through the lens of it, I only see the truth of that perspective, right? And so if that's a limit, like I'm not enough, or I don't like money, or whatever those things are, I'm now being altered by that, but I'm not considering it as only a certain lens that I could be wearing. It seems like truth, just like this seems like my real vision once I forget about my glasses, right? So the fundamental shift is to actually be able to take off the lenses, the beliefs that you're holding that are holding you back, and actually look at them and shine them up or throw them away, put on better ones, like get to the right lenses that are the most useful, that most helpful to you, that are not delusional, that don't get you to a place that's like, saying, I am a millionaire, I am a millionaire, I am a millionaire when you're not is delusional. That's not helpful. But saying, I love growing my money and I love, showing up so that I can make money might be really useful, right? So what's the right lens, the important lens to put on? So it's not just about any old affirmation. It's about taking on and really taking in to your sense of self and your beliefs, the right lenses that are good, and ultimately growing the meta skill of being able to see lenses. So back to glasses for a second, I would consider these lenses as soon as there was raindrops on them, right? That would make me aware of my lenses, and I'd have to take them off and clean them to put them back on. Or if I had scratches in my lenses, I would know that I would have to go get new glasses, right? But with our beliefs, because they're so hard to see, we often don't notice the scratches, and we end up with really messed up glasses that we're looking through on the world. And through that, we self-sabotage. We hold ourselves back. We live very limited, sheltered, often very safe lives. But the world isn't as dangerous in the same ways that it used to be. So we've taken on all these safety protection mechanisms that are really holding us back to what's deeply possible for us.
I liked very much you mentioned the contact lenses, and it's probably a different level altogether, because with the lens of the glasses, yes, normally you're not aware of it, but at some point you might see the rim or something like
you
that.
Might notice it a little bit, or it might bump into something, right? You lay down on a pillow and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've got glasses on, right? You forget, and then
the contact lenses, you really goes completely without you realizing it.
Correct. Yeah. So or imagine LASIK surgery that's good enough that you leave and you're happy with it, but it's not perfect, right? But you think that's how the best seeing is, but it still could be better, right?
Yeah. So I suppose then, if we want to change our lenses, our limiting beliefs in that sense, the first thing to do is to identify that we actually are wearing lenses that they do not serve us, and then from there.
Awareness itself can be curative, right? So sometimes if you can see the lens, that alone breaks the spell of it, right? So that is helpful, right? So just getting, and oftentimes because they're invisible to us, this is why you sometimes need a coach or a therapist or somebody like that to help you identify, what am I not seeing here? Like, what am I not getting? And sometimes just a laser coach can come in and go, hey man, like boop, 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 or hey lady, here's what's happening for you. And you go, and then it never has that same effect. Now, many of them are so deep, especially the ones down at the identity level, that just seeing them, we actually need to go do some work. We need to actually change them in a little bit deeper way. And that's where some of these tools, like we've mentioned, shadow work, timeline therapy, doing things like story casting, things like that are very powerful to shift profound limiting beliefs. But without doing that, you're left limited in ways that you're blind to, right? That are holding you back, which is maybe a little scary for some, but it also, I hope, is really exciting, right? Because there's a more idealized version of you that's possible, right? There's a version of you that can be more universally confident, more universally ready to take action, more focused, more happy, has emotional mastery, that, these persistent anxieties and worries and things that make us sad can really be transcended in a profound way, so that your base level way of being is just way more idealized.
In your experience, how easy is it to dispose of limiting beliefs that really hold someone down?
Very, very much quicker than you would think. And so, one of my problems with some of therapy is that you end up in a long story where you've identified the lens. Well, that's because your mom did that when you were 5. And so now the conversation moves, because the therapist is also human. And, you end up in this long conversation about every week how that one limit from when you were 5 years old is still affecting you today. Well, see it again. That's why. So identifying it can be transformative, and that is important, and that is the first step. But then getting beyond it, actually putting it down, actually creating a new reality for yourself now where that is no longer true for you, is the real transformation, right? That's the thing where it's no longer interesting to even carry it because it happened in the past. It's done. We're now done with it. And now it no longer is relevant in the same way. In fact, now I've taken on a new way of being that's profoundly different. And that's the real transformative move. That can be done very quickly, right? So I have a mastermind program that I do with a small group of people. And every single time between about week 2 and week 3, everybody has this collective kind of awareness of, this is ridiculous. Why have I been carrying this? And there's a freedom that comes with that, that is a permanent shift, right? And so it literally is about a week or two, really only like 1 or 2 sessions where we can really get through those. We can find them and meaningfully get past them. And then is the part of putting in the new ones, which really only takes another, week or 2, honestly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I remember something you said earlier about waking up and growing up.
Correct. Yeah. So think about that. The wake up is seeing them as a form of wake up. Transforming them into the new thing is waking up also, right? It's installing that new thing. And then grow up is then applying that in your life meaningfully in all the directions, right? Yeah. So now that you're not afraid to give public talks because we've gotten rid of that phobia, how do we then go apply that so you can go do big talks actually in the world? It's not just about, well, now I'm not afraid of it if it ever comes up, but if it's important to you to go share some message, let's get you on stages, right? And so that's going to take time. You have to find the stage, you have to get the people, you got to do the things, right? That's the grow up. And what you'll find if you do that and apply that, 3 months later, 6 months later, 10 years later, you've now become, a deeply different person, but it was sourced in that change that was in the wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rob, let me ask you something else. You mentioned earlier self-sabotaging. So give me your thoughts on why do people self-sabotage and how can they stop?
I think we've been talking a lot about how they can stop, and we'll come back to that in a second. I think one of the reasons that we self-sabotage is that it is a comfort level. Let's re-say that. It's so I think that we end up in a comfort zone, right? A lot of people talk about, like a thermostat on a wall that we end up with. I can be this happy and I'll only be this sad. And if I hit those limits, I go here. What I like to tell people is that your comfort zone is often not very comfortable, right? It's actually you're dying to get out of it, but it's not comfortable to get out of it. And that's because it's not really about comfort. It's more about familiarity. Okay. So what is familiar to you, what you're used to, is actually what's really okay to your subconscious mind. So your subconscious mind is all about surviving, right? It's not actually about being happy. It's about staying alive for the most part, right? And so what it's done before, what is normal and has been okay before, what I woke up today and did yesterday, doing what I did yesterday habitually is okay to do again. That is the default pattern. Right. So this is why breaking habits is difficult, because to our unconscious mind, that change is potentially dangerous because it's unknown to us. Right. So self-sabotage quite often is, I have this big dream of what I'd like to be, but it's so different than what I am now that it's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar. It's different to do that. So my system, my sense of self, will find ways outside of my conscious mind to sabotage back into what I'm normally comfortable with. Right? So this amount of money, this amount of friends, this amount of business success, this amount of whatever is what we will self-sabotage back into. So many times you'll know, like let's say you're a business owner, you know that there's these 10 calls that you should make to go get these big sales, but you find ways to just be busy again today. I had to, rearrange this one drawer in my kitchen, or today I actually should do taxes or whatever. And if as a coach, if you came in and talked to them 3 months later, be like, did you ever make those 10 calls? And be like, oh no, I never got to that, whatever. That's an unconscious form of self-sabotage that's normalizing us to stay playing small, to stay playing safe, because things like tall poppy syndrome and whatnot, we get scared. If I'm too big, I might get chopped down. This comes from lots of things. It comes from, everything from, really aggressive abuse to actually just sometimes when we get better than our familial situation, our parents might say, oh, okay, rich guy or whatever, and kind of shame us back down because it's hard to escape the gravity of what your familial level of success is. If you have a group of friends and all of a sudden you become much more successful than your friends, they start to look at you and go, hey, what's going on with you? Or if you really get in shape, but all your friends are still really out of shape, they'll start maybe mocking you like, okay, sexy guy, whatever, and those things become difficult. So there's to have the confidence that it takes to be new and be different. There's all these different reasons why we shrink and why we do this, because it's safer, because it doesn't make us stand out. It doesn't make us take on any kind of criticism. And with what we see online now, some of that criticism can be so loud and from so many directions of just strangers online that if I put out anything online, the bad comments that might come in just from trolls or some bot out there that's just being mean because somebody wrote a program to do it, it ends up hurting our sense of self. And so that's scary. So it's easier to not do it. It's easier to not try. And if I could just survive and sustain, we end up self-sabotaging into that lower level of being.
That's a wonderful explanation of that. Thank you so much. So that's very insightful. Tell me one more thing. Well, we kind of touched upon it earlier on, and that was controlling impulses, in particular negative impulses, things that really do not serve us. What's your thoughts or your recommendation with that?
Yeah, so I think let's talk about it like instant gratification and delayed gratification again, right? That ability to grow your capability to be more for delayed gratification some of the time. I think one of the meta skills to be able to do that is to grow. It's also the meta skill to get away from suffering. It's to be with what is, right? If I can become a kind of person that consistently is more and more okay being with what is, even when it's pleasurable, that I can accept more pleasure, right? That I grow a capacity to be with the good things, but I also grow the capacity to be with the bad things. Because if I'm trying to remain comfortable, right? Comfort is it's often the enemy of exceptional, right? Because to do anything exceptional, we can imagine these great things, but the work to get there is often very uncomfortable. So we have to find a way to be able to be okay in the discomfort of something. And the ground experience of that is in the moment, can I be with what is that's uncomfortable? Can I be with my own nervousness? Can I be with a physical pain of working out a little bit longer to get a better workout in? Not to the degree that I'm hurting myself or putting myself in danger, but what is my capacity? Cold showers we know are very good for depression, but people are like, cold showers are uncomfortable, I won't do them, right? And it's like, okay, but what's your capacity to go, I can go get in a cold bath or I can go get in a cold shower, right? These are little ways. Wim Hof is a great guy that is pushing that coldness, right? A trigger. But that's just one form of, can you be with discomfort in the moment, right? And the less that we can, the more that we're going to follow any impulse of thought or any impulse of addiction or any impulse of, oh, that's going to lead to feeling better, right? And the more unconscious we are, the less conscious tools we have to see where our attention is and what we're actually doing in any moment, the less mastery we're going to have the wisdom to go, this is an uncomfort I should be able to sit with a little bit longer, right? I don't want to do my taxes. I'd rather go watch Netflix, but I'm going to stay in the discomfort for another 15 minutes or another 5 minutes just to get a little further in my taxes. And what you'll find is even if you just commit to 5 more minutes, you may find that once you're past that hump of resistance, you'll stay for half an hour or 45 and get them done, right? You'll see that it's way easier to stay. And then when you do that, the payoff at the end is you actually feel really happy because you accomplished the thing that was difficult, right? So your sense of self starts to grow, your trust in yourself, your ability to know that I have self-mastery, right? This is one of those core functions of self-mastery. Can I do the difficult thing that is in the service of something that's really good for me, even though it's uncomfortable in the moment? And the more that we can grow that capacity, you will very quickly, even at the first small levels of it, you will see that it pays dividends. You start to go, I can stay with the dishes till they're done. I can organize these papers till they're done. Now you become the kind of person that if you're good at that, you can actually start to build a small business that's successful. If you can build a small business that's successful, you can build a bigger business that's successful. If you do that, maybe you could actually be the mayor of a town or what, now you can actually start to influence bigger and bigger things around you because you've become agentic in a way. You have agency over yourself where you're a really powerful person, right? But the beginning of that is, can you manage that impulse control to stay with something a little bit longer than you were before, right?
It brings me back to what we said in the beginning of our conversation about stopping alcohol, which is I realized that when I did my challenge, that it was an impulse when I wanted to have a drink. It was an impulse which, if I resisted that, it wouldn't last long. It would last maybe a few seconds, maybe a minute, as an intense thought. And then once I stayed with it, it would go away.
Something else comes
never
up.
Think of it.
Something else comes up, right? I mean, that's a part of wisdom also, is that, oftentimes it feels like this is going to go on forever, right? But nothing goes on forever. The good things don't go on forever. The bad things don't go on forever. Yeah. And so if you can instead back up, and this is a little bit of self-transcendence, right? So if we talk about that dimension of things, if you can back up from, I'm not permanently anything, this isn't permanently anything, this thought is not going to persist forever, this great moment is not going to persist forever. So I stop grabbing on. The ego wants permanence. The ego wants, I'm never going to be hurt. I'm permanently safe. I'm permanently okay. But we know that's not true. I mean, eventually we're all going to not be here, right? So like nothing is permanent. Whatever toys you amass in this life, you don't get to take them with you, right? So, that car that you want to keep perfectly and not ever scratch, it's way better to really realize, I'd like to keep that car perfect, but if it gets a scratch, yeah, things get scratches. That's what it is. I'll either get it fixed or I'll let it be, or, you all of a sudden have a lot more freedom, not trying to hold on or not trying to hold permanent to anything, right?
Outstanding.
Yeah.
What does the term personal development mean to you?
I think a lot of what we've already talked about. So personal development is taking an interest in developing yourself so that you can be happy, effective, psychologically, physically, societally balanced in a way that is meaningful to you, right? So that you can know and connect with a meaningful purpose for yourself, so that you can have a life that's filled with passion, so that you're not self-sabotaging or hurting yourself or others, right? So that you're not addicted. And so that path of developing yourself is exactly what I'm trying to codify into, step 1, step 2, step 3, to take people through what that looks like, to go from anywhere from deep dysfunction to okay function to exceptional function in all those dimensions of how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. And if you do that well, we have great tools that are helpful to do that, right? We have great tools in thinking, we have great tools in emotional mastery, and we have great tools in applying yourself in the doing space so that you can just live a life that's more evolved.
Sure. And even though I'm sure that your difficult past has actually led you to where you are at the moment, and it was necessary, but still I will ask, if you had the chance to go back in time and meet your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give him?
That's a great question. So my, let's say younger self, because I'm thinking about, there's probably different things that I would say to a younger version, to the 20-year-old version, to the 30-year-old version, et cetera. The first one was to the really dysfunctional version of me way back when. I would have probably done maybe a little bit of reparenting. I would have loved that person. I would have helped them to feel seen and okay, and loved and accepted, right? I would have given a base of safety and care and love, like I would do in a parenting relationship, right? I would, at first and foremost, let this person feel safe and okay in their experience of being, right? A more young adult version of myself, I would say, I would start to talk about some of these tools of attention and tools of unconscious patterns, and really start to share what's available to gain a sense of self-mastery, and probably gotten clear on helping that version of myself know what they really wanted, right? So not to be all over the place in my answer. I apologize that I'm shotgun answering a lot of these things. But I think that real personal development and real transformation often can be so profound that you can't even see what it is from where you are. So if you're not fully evolved in whatever way, your version of what you think you need is actually, it's what you think you want, but it's not actually the thing that you want, right? You think you want 5 new clients for your business. You think you want a really sexy body on the beach or whatever. But what you actually want is a deep sense of change in yourself, which looks more like self-mastery and self-actualization and self-transcendence, right? Like those are what you actually should be working on, because those are the master keys to not only get you the body you want and the clients you want and all those things, but everything else you're going to want along the way, because you don't just want that one thing, right? I think that we have a main problem that whatever the problem is in this moment feels as though that's all I need. Like that's my full focus, right? So yeah, I often use the example of if you were to lose your iPhone or your Android, that would completely take over your life for that moment. Be like, where's my phone? Like every other thing on the problem thing would go away and nothing could continue until you get the phone, right? But a way more mature together understanding is that, yes, I might need to find my phone, but the bigger game here is, how can I be okay without a phone? How can I, like that's just a little aspect of myself. So anyway, most of our problems look like that. So if I went back to a younger version of myself, I would show that what you're looking for is actually not external. It's really like an internal game that you should shift your focus to change faster and get there quicker.
Rob, you have a phrase tattooed on your arm there that says stillness in motion. Yes. What's that about?
So, okay, so we'll go back to meditation for a second, right? So if I teach somebody some of these tools of attention, and through that I'm inviting them to maybe sit in meditation for a minute a day, let's say, it's real simple. And maybe they grow that practice to 10 minutes a day, and they actually start to get this sense of stillness, which is this beauty of being in experience rather than being lost in thought. It doesn't mean there's no thought, but when thought comes up, they can come back to experience. Okay, I'm going to call that stillness, right? There's a quality of stillness in your being that can be really pleasurable, can be really beautiful, can be really okay, right? Then we have to get off the seat, and now we're in motion. Now we're in the doing. Now we're back to time, right? So stillness might be really equated to now, right? It's almost like dealing with time differently. It's like I'm present, I'm here, I'm in the experience of being, right? That's really beautiful and meaningful. But there's also motion. I have to go do things over time. And so I have to use time. I have to model time. I have to use thought, right? So we don't want to throw away thought. Thought is super important and it matters. But I want to use thought as a tool. I don't want to be lost in thought as it's the only reality. I want to be able to objectify it and use it as a tool. So most people will get some sense of what stillness means if they try a meditation practice, but then they get into their doing or into the motion of life, and they'll say things like, I got to get back to the meditation cushion, right? Like I have to calm down to find stillness again. And what I think is that's a great evolution. Just to have any access to stillness at all is a great evolution. But what I'm really trying to get people to is that you can have a sense of stillness in motion. You can actually have a quality of being in your doing, where being and doing actually merge and they're not separate things, right? So this is the guy walking down the hallway and every step is beautiful. I actually have a sense of real being here. Like I'm aware of what my seat feels like. I can feel my feet, but I'm also talking and modeling you. And we're dancing in this space of motion, of being, right? Of doing, right? We're doing something like a podcast, but I'm also bringing a real felt sense of being into it. And so I would say that at a higher level, that is stillness in motion, right? It is being still in my doing that is really beautiful. And that starts to look more, and not literally just like this, but more like what you might think Tai Chi looks like or something, right? Like you're literally doing the dishes or giving a speech or talking with friends and being around a fire. Those can be deeply embodied and have a real sense of awakeness and stillness in them. And honestly, this is what flow states look like when you talk to the best athletes as they're kicking ass. And, the best fighters that are doing very aggressive things, the highest version of that has a sense of, being in it that's really beautiful. So that's what that means.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Is there anything that you were hoping we would talk about today and I completely missed asking you?
No, I'm just excited to be here, and I'm really happy to explore this stuff with you. It's really fun to think through it with you and in front of you, and have you bounce stuff back to me. It's been great. So yeah, I think we got to a lot of really important stuff, and I think it's good. Maybe the fact you asked me about personal development, and I broke it into a bunch of different things. I mean, the thing that I have named that is identity shifting. And the reason I talk about it that way is that I want people to really know that there is a much more realized version of themselves that can be attained if they take on personal development, and that the deepest version of that, in the way that I talk about it at least, is really changing who you are in a meaningful way. And by the way, your ego is going to resist that, right? Like the ego doesn't want to change. It wants to get the world to change around it, right? But I'm going to ask a quick question. Is it harder to change the world, or is it harder to change yourself, right? And so if we can get past that and really open to, okay, where am I maybe not wired accurately? Maybe I could gain a couple skills. Maybe there's some things in my ways of being that could change. And I could really take on that I am capable of being different than I am right now and change who I am, right? That is, now you've changed your identity in a meaningful way. And I've already said this a little bit, but that happens all the time, right? So you're no longer your 5-year-old self. If you're growing, you're no longer your 20-year-old self. If you've become a parent, people know, like whether you want to or not, you're different as soon as you're a parent. If you take on a business, you're different as soon as you become a business owner, right? So our identity is shifting all the time, but we can do it consciously. We can actually take our conscious attention and shift ourselves. And that is maybe the most powerful thing of being a human being, right? I don't think dogs do that. I don't think birds do that, but humans can do that. And a lot of us don't, but that's really sad because we can. And if you choose to take it on, there are really profound things in the personal development space that can allow you to not only succeed in all the different levels, but have a quality of life that is much more meaningful and happy and realized than what you may be experiencing today.
Awesome. Rob, how can people find out more about you? Obviously, I'll put them in the show notes, but where would you direct people?
Sure. I think the easiest way is just to go to robscott.com. You can find my podcast there. You can find my different programs there. There's free tools for people. And if anybody wanted to look into working with me, they can find how to do that there as well.
I want to thank you very much for our conversation today. And I will tell you from my heart, honestly, that it's been one of the most fascinating podcast interviews I've done so far. So I really appreciate you and thank you very much for this.
Well, knowing the quality of people that you've had on in the past, that's a very touching comment. So thank you very much. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you. Any last parting words?
No, just deep gratitude. And I hope that people can take some of these things and have them help. That's my real hope.
I hope you enjoyed listening. If you have, please share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want more inspirational and actionable knowledge, join my Facebook group, Personal Development Mastery. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/PDM group. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in,